The god from his world mistakenly caused Kelvin to die and be reincarnated into another world by the goddess of reincarnation. Despite his affection for her, he will have no memories of her or his previous life due to reincarnation. Awakening in a forest, a menu pops up in front of Kelvin that relays a message from the goddess of reincarnation, detailing his reincarnation situation, the world he is in, and his stats. Looking at his stats on the menu and finding out he is a summoner, the menu suggests heading to the nearby town and registering as an adventurer at the Adventurers Guild there. Arriving in the town of Parth, Kelvin reveals how Melfina became the goddess of reincarnation and how he convinced her to become his tame companion. It's also revealed that Kelvin gave up his previous life memories in exchange for more skill points. He then asks if he'd be able to summon her. However, Melfina reveals that Kelvin is unable to do it as his MP level isn't adequate as of yet. Soon, Kelvin talks with the guild receptionist at the Lively Adventurers Guild to register there. Kelvin can read and write in that world and is able to register himself in the guild. To avoid attracting attention from the nation lords because of his title summoner, Kelvin puts himself down as a green mage. Once registered as an F-rank adventurers, the receptionist discloses the guild's ranking system and other pertinent information. Afterward, Kelvin purchases a wooden rod from the weapons store and heads to the grassy plains outside Parth to search for some blue slimes. Upon finding some, Kelvin uses his S-rank appraisal eye on them and learns their stats. Learning from Melfina that one must gain a monster's consent by weakening them, Kelvin decides not to use his magic and instead use his wooden rod to attack them. However, this attempt fails and causes him to get struck in the stomach by one of the slimes. Despite this, Kelvin continues to try and fight it, and is soon able to make a contract with the slime. Kelvin names his new slime companion Clotho and learns he can communicate with his companions through wordless contact. After calling that skill his servant network, Kelvin summons Clotho, and with his help, defeats the slimes in the area. Returning to the town with enough gold, Kelvin takes a detour down an alleyway and finds a slave trader showcasing his slaves for sale. A half-blooded elf catches Kelvin's eye, but he pays no mind to it. The following day, Kelvin goes on a monster hunting spree with Clotho. At the Adventurers Guild, Kelvin learns from Ainge that he's been promoted to E rank, but expresses concern for him taking on higher-ranked missions without forming a party. Noting that Kelvin will be vying for D rank next, Ainge advises that he upgrade his equipment before he takes the necessary steps toward his new goal. Acknowledging the advice, Kelvin asks to take on a D rank quest. It's then that an adventurer named Cashel suggests that he take the Black Ghost Knight quest. Cashel introduces himself to Kelvin as a D-rank adventurer. A conversation from some adventurers in the guild reveals that Cashel has the strength of a B rank and is a rookie crusher. Cashel offers Kelvin to join his party. However, Ainge admonishes it as the Black Ghost Knight is reportedly stronger than the others. On the other hand, Kelvin declines the offer, and when Cashel still insists, Kelvin uses his appraisal eye on Cashel to learn his stats and ominous title. So in light of this, Kelvin suggests they have a competition between them of who can defeat the Black Ghost Knight first. Cashel accepts the terms with a tad of reluctance and leaves as Kelvin plots how he will handle the situation. Cashel regroups outside the guild with his two shitty party members, Jimmel and Raj. Around dusk inside the Wicked Spirit's castle, Cashel's group reaches the castle's hallway just before the throne room, where they find the bodies of undead skeletons scattered across the floor. Kelvin comes out of hiding with his verdant staff in hand, and Cashel's group notice this internally, citing that he's a wind mage and how they'll handle him. However, Kelvin calls out to the group that they're hunting him, and they, in turn, believe that Kelvin is after the bounty on Cashel's party members' heads. Uninterested in that, Kelvin taunts the group, making Raj step forth to try and attack Kelvin, only to fall into his swampy floor trap called Mudvine. Cashel deduces that Kelvin cast the spell using his concealment skill, and following his instincts, Jimmel fearfully flees the scene, only to be confronted by the recently evolved Clotho. A flashback reveals that after Kelvin killed enough monsters, Clotho evolved from a blue slime to a slime Glutonia. Back in the present, Clotho easily defeats Jimmel, and then Rage escapes his swampy confines only to be constricted by Clotho. Cashel is sequentially dealt with by Kelvin. Wasting no further time, Kelvin heads into the room where the Black Ghost Knight stood, and after using his appraisal eye on him, learns his name is Gerard as well as his stats and skills. After he observes Gerard's skills, Kelvin notes his interest in recruiting him. This leads to the two having a civil conversation, and Kelvin learns a bit about why Gerard became a monster. Wanting to make a contract with Gerard, Kelvin duels with him. During the fight, Gerard recalls the memories of the fall of the kingdom he once served called Alcarl, when an elven emissary from the western continent named Gildora came and asked him to join the Liza Empire and destroy the Empire of Deramis. The king refused the offer, but Gildora warned of the consequences of refusing the offer. The kingdom fell to ruin shortly after, and Gerard's wife Betty and daughter Connie passed away. Back in the present, Gerard vows to avenge the land of Alcarl, which keeps him duty-bound to the realm of the living. However, Kelvin defeats him with the combined efforts of Clotho. The next day, Kelvin turns in the quest for the Black Ghost Knight and learns that Cashel's group was imprisoned and will likely be executed for their crimes. As Kelvin celebrates his accomplished quest, Ainge informs him that he's to be promoted even further by the guild master. Atop the stairway, Kelvin runs into a finely dressed older man. Kelvin meets the guild master, departs Adventurers Guild Leo, and he uses his appraising eye on Kelvin to discern who he is. Within the guild master's room, Kelvin is served some tea by Leo as they discuss Kelvin's recent accomplishment in subjugating the Black Ghost Knight and revealing Cashel's insubordination. However, Leo asks Kelvin if he is, in fact, a summoner, and after following the advice of his tamed monsters, admits that he is, but asks why Leo did nothing about Cashel when he knew about his shady involvement. To that point, Leo confesses that he couldn't lay a hand on Cashel because he's a noble from the militant nation of Trison and needed solid proof for his claims. Getting to the point of the conversation, Leo expresses his desire to become friends with Kelvin, knowing he's met other worlders in the past, being the heroes of the Holy Empire Deramis. Melfina notes that she was the one who reincarnated them and promises to tell Kelvin more later if he's curious. Leo continues his explanation about the heroes of Deramis, claiming that the priestess there foretold of the revival of the Demon Lord. Kelvin deduces that Leo wants him to protect the town in the stead of the heroes, and Leo confirms it. Afterward, the innkeeper Claire congratulates him for reaching B rank in the guild. Enjoying his lunch in his room, Kelvin has Melfina disclose her information on the heroes of Deramis to him. Her information on the heroes was vague, and they were chosen due to their good looks and knowledge. After hearing this, Kelvin decides to retrieve his reward money from Clotho and heads off the alleyway where the slaves are being sold. Upon reaching the alleyway, Kelvin spots the half-elf from the other day. The slave trader reveals that nobody wishes to purchase her due to her curse that burns anyone who touches her. Getting more information about the curse from Melfina, that it's the Fire Dragon King's curse, and that the only way to break it is an A-rank white magic spell called Sacred Bless. After leaving the scene, Kelvin later returns and purchases the half-elf named Ephil. Kelvin also casts Sacred Bless onto Ephil, breaking the curse placed on her. Later, in Kelvin's room, Ephil is told all of Kelvin's secrets about himself and has her allocate her skill points to her choosing. A month after Kelvin purchases Ephil, the two explore the dark purple forest and subjugate many of the monsters there to level up Ephil and have her gain new skills and abilities. Later that day, Kelvin's group reported the successful subjugation of a wicked sagtree Ainge of the Adventurers Guild, who congratulated them. She also informs them that one more successful quest they complete will allow them to take the rank-up exam. It would allow Kelvin to become rank A and Ephil rank B. At the Holy Empire of Deramis Great Cathedral, the priestess Colette prays to the statue of Melfina, asking for an audience with her. Melfina answers the prayer and Colette gives her an update on the heroes of Deramis. Pleased by the news, Melfina gives Colette an oracle that the heroes need to exterminate an evil in the western continent and to stay far away from Parth. Once that is over, the heroes arrive at the scene and Colette relays the oracle she received to the group. The following day, Kelvin reviews the stats of the hero party with Gerard, Clotho, and Ephil. The heroes' levels are far too low from what they expected. On the other hand, Kelvin is content that he successfully created his staff from a monster material drop, but it's said that he had many failures that led up to that one success. Gerard notes that Kelvin created a dreadnought shield and crimson cape for him. Ephil then notes that she created a sage's black robe for Kelvin with her sewing skill. Claire then knocks on their door to inform Kelvin that the guild wants to speak with him. In the guildmaster's room, Leo informs Kelvin that a rank D dungeon called the Hermit's Cave, where a secret room was discovered, contains a powerful demon inside it. When asked if Kelvin would do the quest, Kelvin accepts it. Afterward, Kelvin, accompanied by Ephil and Gerard, visits the Hermit's Cave dungeon and learns from Urd about the situation surrounding the dungeon. The group enters the dungeon, and once they reach the secret room, they find a demon woman chained to a monolith. Another demon sitting atop a pile of bones introduces himself as Archdemon Victor. Kelvin then asks who the chained woman is, and Victor responds while sealing the door that she is the Demon Lord's daughter. Melfina then informs Kelvin that there were 3 Demon Lords in the past, and the lady must be Gustav's, the current one's daughter. Victor lunges toward the group, but Gerard protects him with his shield, and Victor's plans are sequentially revealed to become the next Demon Lord. An exhilarated Kelvin tells Victor of his excitement fighting against him, and his opponent humors him by casting the black magic spell Haze Army. The spell resurrects a group of demons from one of the skeleton piles nearby, and with a snap of his finger, Victor orders the monsters to attack. Kelvin notes that the monsters are B-ranked and with his wand casts Wind Shot to destroy a small pack of them while Gerard helps him take out the rest. Victor complements the two skills and then uses a smoke bomb to conceal his presence and launch a sneak attack. However, Kelvin could sense his presence and alerts Gerard, who immediately counterattacks. Despite this, Victor overwhelms Gerard and directs his attention to Kelvin, which Clotho use magic absorption on him and then casts Glory's Sanction. The attack binds Victor's left arm, but it's not enough to hold him. Hence, Kelvin casts Vortex Edge to enchant Gerard's sword. As Gerard goes to attack Victor, Aphel will reveal herself and shoot her blaze arrow at Victor. With Victor's right arm charred beyond use, Gerard then slices off his left arm. Although pleased by this outcome, Kelvin has the group fall back as his Glory's Sanction just expired. Victor compliments the group for doing the second most significant damage ever done to him and blames losing his edge from the peace of that era. However, Victor wasn't going to give up and cast Jin Scrimmage on himself to enshroud himself in a dark, ominous force. To prevent the spell from finishing being cast, Kelvin, Aphel, and Gerard each cast a spell or use a skill against Victor, but they're too late. Victor then manages to get the upper hand on Gerard, but before he can attack him any further, Aphel distracts Victor's attention with some arrows. It allows Gerard to launch a counterattack against Victor, who then is overwhelmed by Clotho spitting out all of the failed weapons Kelvin created at him. Clotho causes Victor to be slammed against a wall and for rubble from a pillar to topple over towards Sarah. Victor catches and moves the piece of rubble that would have crushed Sarah, moves it to the side, and faints on his back while conceding defeat. Kelvin then calls out Victor's lie to eat Sarah, to which he answers that if he didn't lie, Kelvin's party wouldn't have fought as hard as they did against him. To his admission, Gustav entrusted Victor with protecting Sarah as her caretaker. A flashback shows Victor's past as the caretaker for Sarah. In it, Victor is shown training Sarah in magical pugilism. Eventually, the hero's party attacked the Demon King's castle. Although King Gustav's life was in danger, he put his seal on Sarah that only a human could break and sent her to a faraway place where she'd be safe. When Victor finally found Sarah, he protect her and wait for the hero to be dead and for an era of peace to revive her so she could become the next Demon King. Before he dies, Victor asks that Sarah join Kelvin's party. Kelvin then breaks the seal on Sarah, and when she awakens, she tearfully curses Victor and her father for their selfishness. Outside, the party is met by Erd, who was shown proof of subjugation of the demon in the dungeon. Erd accepts the item, but asks who the lady Kelvin was carrying on his back was, and Kelvin answers that it was someone the demon possessed. In truth, it was Sarah wearing a camouflage hairpin to hide her wings and horns. Afterward, Kelvin evolves Gerard into an abyssal knight commander. After Kelvin has a brief conversation with Sarah, he and his party take Sarah to Parth and show her around a bit. Later, Kelvin reports to the Adventurers Guild about successfully subjugating the demon in the dungeon, which elevates him to rank A in the guild. Kelvin formally tames Sarah as one of his tamed monsters and later shows off the fruits of his S-rank blacksmithing and Aphel's S-rank sewing in his room. Sarah showcases the weapon Arondite, created from Victor's armor and Armor Queen's Terror. Onto Gerard, he receives a new magical sword called the Insleaf. The group ride on a wagon heading toward Toraj. Sarah notes that some hidden people were watching them. At that moment, a group of bandits led by a lady introduced themselves as the infamous Black Wind Gang. The wagon driver recognizes them as an infamous gang that mainly work around Toraj, but were said to have been taken out by an A-rank adventurer from Tryson. Using an appraisal of the bandits, Kelvin allows Sarah to handle them independently, but doesn't allow her to use the Arondite. Exiting the wagon, Sarah first handily defeats the bandit Ensu, who tries to capture her. Frightened by Sarah's unnatural strength, the head of the bandits sends out the others to deal with her, but quickly gets overwhelmed as well. A large mallet-wielding bandit named Gilda also gets overpowered by Sarah, despite having above 200 level strength. With the bandits now captured, the head bandits claim their boss is level 70, which intrigues Kelvin and asks her for more information. Finally reaching their destination of Toraj, Kelvin notes how it resembles old Japan. Afterward, the group reaches Toraj's Adventurers Guild and turns in the bandits they captured. They're formally thanked by the guild master Mist. As Mist informs the group, she and Leo were at the same party back in the day, and his title was the Analyzer. Moving onward, they discuss the matters involving the Black Wind, where Tryson's famous adventurer Kristoff supposedly destroyed the group. However, they're now back and capturing people for the slave trading business. Despite knowing that the group is in Toraj, no actions can be taken against them because it would cause a rift between the Tryson and Toraj. Wanting to find the bandits, Kelvin has Sarah try and locate one of them. Upon trying, Sarah finds a level 50 person by the town entrance. Hearing this excites Kelvin as the heroes of Deramis arrive in the town. Later, the heroes of Diramis learn of the bandit situation, and although Toya wants to deal with them, Setsuna admonishes him from getting involved. She reasons that they're to head west under the guidance of Melfina, but Toya insists they stay and help the people that are in need. While Toya and Setsuna bicker about the situation, Mist notes how Kelvin requested she relay this information to the heroes and recalls how Kelvin had a plan that'd suit his needs. Down in the bandits' base, a bandit named Hope was about to violate a little slave girl named Ruka, but Kelvin's party arrives at the scene in the nick of time. Hope then tries to attack them, but is taken out by a Gerard in a single punch. Upstairs, Kristoff, revealed to be the bandit leader, talks with Prisra, informing her that Karna, the head bandit from earlier, had been captured. At that moment, Hope appears at the room door and faints to the ground upon its opening. Kelvin then goes after Kristoff, Sarah after Prisra, and Gerard after another member named Otto. Although Kristoff is excited to fight against Kelvin, he corrects them that they're not there to fight, but to prepare themselves for the main course. Soon the heroes of Diramis reach the bandits' hideout and reaching the room where the slaves were held captive. The heroes also encounter Clotho. Drawing his sword against Clotho, Luca stands in the protection of Clotho, claiming it's the pet of their savior. Understanding his mistake, Toya introduces himself as the hero of Diramis to them all. A member of the group named Nana communicated with Clotho and revealed it was there simply to protect the slaves from any harm. Also, Luca's mom asks the heroes that they save the Ranka heroes who are in trouble. Wasting no time, the heroes rush to where Kristoff and his companions were at and find them all knocked out on the ground. They then confront Kelvin's group who had awaited the heroes' arrival. The heroes of Diramis confront Kelvin's group and accuse them of being the Black Wind. Kelvin plays along with the accusation and boasts how vulnerable Gilda's group was. Unnerved by Kelvin's audacity, the heroes of Diramis individually introduce themselves and Toya proclaims justice will be served against them. Hearing this declaration makes Kelvin laugh and mocks them, claiming they're too weak, but proposes a game where he'll face off against them all, and the winner has their wish fulfilled. Afterward, they change their location to a more open area, and Ethel reveals that Kelvin planned that if he won, he'd have the heroes testify against Kristoff and his gang. On the opposite side, Toya chastises Kelvin, believing he's the Black Wind bandit group with a string of nefarious deeds under their belt. Wasting no time, the heroes call upon their individual fairies' blessings and Toya starts the attack. Kelvin then casts radiant lances against them, forcing Toya and Setsuna to block the attacks. Nana then calls out the tamed monster named Muni from her bag to use fire breath against Kelvin, and he briskly dodges the attack with an agility buff. He then uses his skill eater on Miyabi. Kelvin then claims that he stole Miyabi's parallel thinking, causing Toya to attack Kelvin as Setsuna and Nana tend to the incapacitated Miyabi. The agitated Toya attacks Kelvin in close proximity to prevent him from casting any spells. However, Kelvin manages to hold Toya off with a single hand, utilizing Sarah's borrowed S-rank martial arts skill. Kelvin casts Adamant Rampart, creating a stone blockade from the ground. However, Setsuna manages to slice right through it. Appearing from behind the falling rubble, Kelvin casts a giant fireball aimed at Setsuna, but Toya blocks it with his sword. Despite Toya brushing off the attack as nothing special and reciting his determination to defeat the Demon King, Setsuna slaps him and tearfully claims to be more mindful. A brief flashback of when the heroes of Diramis arrived in the alternate world is shown, with Setsuna giving commentary about it. Setsuna pleads with Toya to rely on them more as a team. Toya then apologizes for his past discretions to the group. Once that was all settled, the fight continues when a light fairy blinds Kelvin. Nana and Miyabi both use ice and dark magic to immobilize Kelvin's movement, and Toya and Setsuna try and attack Kelvin, but he counterattacks with a cleft detonation spell. After curing himself of his blindness, Kelvin compliments the group for their efforts thus far. He goes on to advise the heroes of their inadequate combat techniques. Enraged by Toya's advice, the heroes entrap and restrain Kelvin in what appears to be a disadvantageous situation. However, Kelvin summons his adamantine guardians and utilizes the parallel thinking he stole, creating a new spell, Radiant Crossfire. Using that spell frees Kelvin from his restraints and one by one takes out the hero party. Afterward, Toya awakens and is fully explained the truth of who Kelvin and his group are. Toya then formally apologizes to Kelvin after he learns everything, and Kelvin promises not to hold anything against him so long as he follows up with his side of the bargain. Speaking on behalf of his team, Toya agrees and Kelvin's team is asked to strip, much to their dismay. Kelvin, Miss, and a guild receptionist watch as Luca, her mother, and other freed slaves are driven away on a wagon. The heroes of Diramis are shown in a cave struggling against a giant octopus they're facing off against as Kelvin observes them. Despite Kelvin giving the group advice on how to proceed, they still struggle to fight against the octopus monster, and when they finally manage to defeat it, Kelvin allows the picnic to start. During the picnic, Daramis priestess Colette is mentioned. Furthermore, Toya details how Colette summoned them, and before they reached the alternate world, they met with Melfina. Kelvin asks the group how they take upon an S-class dungeon with their current strength. Toya answers that they have to run due to their inadequate power. Just then, Sarah fishes up a sinister dragon, the boss monster of the cave. As Sarah fights against the dragon, Kelvin then states that his action would cause the people he's sworn to protect to suffer. Afterward, Kelvin and his group see Toya's group off as they take a boat ride to their next destination. He gives each of them a pendant as a going-away present. As Kelvin watches, Toya's ship sails off. Gerard approaches Kelvin and asks him what's on his mind. Kelvin then asks Gerard if the country Lysaea that destroyed his home country Alcarl is located on the continent across the sea, and Gerard confirms it. Sequentially, Kelvin asks if they were to pick a fight with Lysaea, would they win against them? Gerard then answers that he believes they would, but Kelvin wants to defeat the other S-class monsters on the continent they're on now. Kelvin also reveals that the pendants have a minor stats boost enchantment and a secret function he hopes will never have to be used. Sarah then informs the group that a messenger sent by Guild Master Mist said an important person wants to meet with them. Afterward, Kelvin and the group meet with the Queen of Toraj, Tsubaki Fujiwara, who thanks them for dealing with the Black Wind Bandits and the S-rank dragon. Despite her desire to hold a feast for their achievements, Tsubaki cannot due to the conflict surrounding Trison, but she still hopes to reward them appropriately. Tsubaki then asks Kelvin what he'd like. Kelvin answers the right to purchase the rice there. Several days later, Tsubaki tries to seduce and entice Kelvin by staying at Toraj, but he flatly rejects the offer because they wish to return to Parth. To help them along the way, Tsubaki allows Kelvin's group to use Toraj's teleportation gate. Eventually, the news of Kelvin meeting the Toraj queen spreads thanks to Ainge. However, he downplays it, stating he has no plans to settle there. Afterward, Kelvin and his companions purchase a house. Luca and her mother arrive at the house as they are hired to be house servants. That night, Melfina returns to Kelvin in the avatar body she talked about before. Later in the living room, Melfina asks to be called Mel instead of her full name to avoid any conflict with Daramis, and then bestows Kelvin a blessing that has a couple of effects. The first effect is it prevents him from receiving a fatal wound once a month. The second is the ability to summon heroes. Afterwards, Sarah and Mel spar against each other as Luca and Gerard observe the fight. Outside the mansion, Kelvin contemplates whether or not the heroes of Daramis made it to the western continent and about his new hero summoning ability. Once Sarah and Mel finish their spar, they retire to the bath area where Ethel offers her services to them. Later, Mel meets Kelvin in the backyard and he asks her about the importance of heroes. Before she answers the question, Mel talks about the Demon King first, which all Demon Kings possess a unique skill called Papilla. It's a skill with two abilities. The first ability multiplies the evil within its user, and the second is the nullification of all damage. That's where the heroes come in, as their nature is fundamentally different from those in that world. Noting that if Kelvin is anxious about the hero's summoning process, Mel suggests that he perform a reincarnation summon and explains the two different summoning techniques. That night, Kelvin decides to summon a hero through a reincarnation summoning process. Recalling all of his tan creatures, Kelvin drinks a recovery potion given to him by Ethel, and after drinking it, is guided through the reincarnation summoning process by Mel. Once Kelvin commences the process, the summoned person starts picking their skills, abilities, age, and appearance. The hero summoned was named Rio, and she tearfully thanked Kelvin for summoning her. Rio then collapsed due to exhaustion from her reincarnation. Afterward, Rio wakes up in her own room and immediately heads outside to take in the area. Rio was then joined by Kelvin, who told her that he was also reincarnated into that world. Kelvin then explains his time in that world thus far. In turn, Rio explains her backstory to Kelvin as a sickly individual whose only escape was through books and how grateful she now is in the new world. Furthermore, Rio asks to join his adventurer party and Kelvin accepts the offer. In his room on his bed, Kelvin wakes up during the night to find that Sarah, Mel, and Rio. Later that day, Kelvin allows Rio to frolic around the dark purple forest with a Clotho clone on her shoulder. Kelvin then informs Ruka and Ellie, who both have Clotho clones on their heads, that he's going to have them leveling up using his experience share technique. Ethel then reports that a shadow wolf is making its way toward them, and Kelvin allows it passage so he can deal with it himself. Using air pressure against it, Kelvin tames it once its HP is halved. Kelvin then summons the newly tamed shadow wolf, and immediately, Luca and Rio hug it. Ethel then reports to Kelvin that Erd's party is approaching the area. Once Erd's party reaches Kelvin and his group, they inform them of their plans to slay the monsters around the area for a chance to be promoted to B rank. Kelvin then introduces Luca and Ellie to Erd's party as his maids at his mansion. Mel and Rio then introduce themselves to Erd's party as well. The beautiful girls' introductions make Erd's party members envious and run away. When Sarah's group returns from their monster hunt, it's revealed that they eliminated all the monsters in the forest. Kelvin would later meet with Erd and formally apologize to him. Erd downplays the situation but recommends that he report it to Leo, who would likely have Kelvin take the S-rank promotion exam. Afterward, Kelvin and Rio bathe the Shadow Wolf in the mansion courtyard. Kelvin contemplates the S-rank exam and Rio reveals that she named the Shadow Wolf Alex. Kelvin assigned Alex to Rio as her partner. That night, Kelvin learns from Sarah that 14 assassins have surrounded the mansion, and Sarah notes that despite Sarah telling her about them, she couldn't sense their presence. Using the Farsight skill he borrowed from Eiffel to analyze the intruder's level, Kelvin manages to locate the leader as the one with the highest level. Deciding that fighting against the intruders will be a perfect test for Rio, Kelvin has her fight against them and gives her a mini Clotho, and uploads his Farsight and Analyze skills to the slave network. Lastly, Kelvin gives Rio the resonating mithril sword. Outside of the mansion, the intruders are not only revealed to be associated with Kristoff, but also Tryson. Once the intruders lay foot on the property, Rio and Alex deal with them as Kelvin and Sarah observe their actions from the safety of the mansion. The moment the intruders are defeated, Kelvin has Clotho clean up the area and then goes to deal with the stragglers outside of the mansion. Meanwhile, at Tryson Castle, Zell, the Emperor of Tryson, holds a meeting with his generals and children regarding the recent exposure of their cooperation with Kristoff and his slave trading ring. Because of this revelation, Duramis, Turaj, and Gon are all planning to form an official alliance to fight against Tryson. Despite informing the nations that Kristoff has nothing to do with Tryson, Emperor Zell worries that's not enough to allay their suspicions. Tristan then suggests that they go to war, believing the weak nation's military forces are weak compared to theirs and that now would be an optimal time to unify the continent. Although sounding as if she speaks in favor of the endeavor, Shutora voices her opinion against it. On the other hand, her brother Asgard speaks in favor of it. General Dan also sides with Shutora, leaving the final vote at an impasse, leaving the tiebreaker to General Clive. Afterward, General Dan's son, Jin, relays a message to Clive in his room, where he has just finished performing his hedonistic tendencies. Riding a wagon through the Crest Forest located southwest of Gond, Kelvin's group rush to an elven village. Sarah then mentions how strange it is that elves are living on the eastern continent. Mel then explains that over a decade ago, elves from their native western continent migrated to the eastern one and are currently under Gond's protection. A flashback from Kelvin's meeting with Guildmaster Leo reveals that there have been small-scale skirmishes between Tryson and its neighboring border country Gond. Tryson's reluctance to start any trouble with Parth or Turaj is notable too, which leads them to believe acts of forced recon and slavery is being committed. Leo surmises that an invasion from Tryson will happen in the future and will likely start a war. Leo then gives Kelvin a special quest by Leonhard Gon, the Beast King of Gon, who wishes to meet with Kelvin personally. Back in the present, Gerard comments on how fortunate Kelvin is to have King Leonhard perform an S-rank promotion. Kelvin notes that he also needed Queen Tsubaki's approval for the exam. After a brief history of Leonhard's past is given, and the group discusses the task at hand to defend an elven village from an S-rank monster, which Kelvin believes is linked to Tryson. Later, they are stopped by a group of elven archers, but Kelvin clears up the situation, and the village elder Nelrez appears before them and greets them. Before continuing, Nelrez recognizes Eiffel as Rumil and exasperatedly asks how she's still alive. Afterward, in the elven village, Nelrez apologizes to Kelvin and the party for his earlier behavior, and Kelvin asks about Lumil. Nelrez then explains the elven village's past when they were settled in the western continent. When the fire dragon appeared in front of the village, he demanded that the elf who had humiliated him come forward or he would burn the village to the ground. It wasn't until nearly half of the village was destroyed that Lumil stepped forward and asked that the dragon calm its rage. Proclaiming that Lumil wasn't the one, the dragon promised to stop if she became his bride. Lumil accepted the offer and before leaving with the dragon left a pendant in Nelrez's care. Nelrez admits that Lumil's dead and bloody body was found in the forest a decade later. Fearing the dragon's return, the elves fled to the eastern continent. It's speculated that Lumi was Eiffle's mother, and that the dragon wasn't her father since only a human can reproduce with an elf. Switching over to the main subject, Nelrez explains that monsters who can penetrate the barrier erected around the village kidnap the village elves. Briefed on the situation, Kelvin and the party agree to help Nelrez and the village, and Kelvin asks Nelrez permission to make some minor renovations to the village, and Nelrez agrees. That night, monsters lead by a commander from Tryson and his soldiers lead them to the elven village under General Tristan's orders. Soon, the soldiers working under the commander are smoked one by Ethel with her newly gifted shadow bow created by Kelvin, who gives recon support. Meanwhile, a lone messenger informs the vice commander that Unit 4 was wiped out and its battalion commander was taken hostage. It's further reported that the monsters, all of which were B rank, were taken out by an adventurer's party. The vice commander then uses their secret weapon when Mel and Rio arrive at the camp. A huge lord then appears and Mel has Rio and Alex take care of it, as a way for Rio to prove she's a true adventurer. Accepting the challenge, Rio attempts to attack the huge lord's head with her sword, but it breaks on impact. Regaining her composure on the ground, Rio asks for Clotho and Alex's help, which Cloth spits up some new weapons for Rio and Alex to use against the lord. Rio's dual blade attack with Alex proves effective as it brings the lord to its knees, but causes it to change into its true form, the Furnace Lord. However, Rio takes out the Furnace Lord with her Generate Edge attack. Back at the village, General Clive, accompanied by 5 personal soldiers, attack Kelvin and Ethel. Clive then demands that Ethel become his slave and tries to charm her, but Kelvin retaliates by attacking him and declaring that he won't lay a finger on his woman. Kelvin then casts an appraisal on Clive to learn his stats, and that he's also a reincarnated individual. Upset that his background has been uncovered, Clive surmises that Kelvin is a fellow reincarnated individual too. After Kelvin has Ethel retreat in stealth mode, he converts the mountain he stood upon into 4 obsidian javelins and uses them against Clive. However, Clive's Helix barrier protects him from the 4 weapons attacks, and his charmed soldiers then start to attack Kelvin. At that moment, Ethel breaks Clive's Helix barrier with an arrow, and Kelvin is joined by the 4 golems he created. Impressed by the golems, Clive has his soldiers deal with them while he takes care of Kelvin. During his fight against Clive, Kelvin becomes aware that Clive's attacks were also hitting his soldiers. Clive then boasts how this cheat ability allows him to live freely without restrictions. Clive recasts his Helix barrier and the fight continues. After their exchange, Kelvin manages to break Clive's Helix barrier and scar his face. On the other hand, Clive manages to break Kelvin's staff, which he has Clotho devour. Enraged, Clive casts a rank S spell, Tempest Barrier, causing the surrounding area to be caught up in its windy fury. So Kelvin has Clotho bring out his Black Staff Disaster. Powering up his staff, Kelvin uses it to break Clive's Tempest Barrier and, in the process, slicks a nearby mountain's top off and Clive's legs. Before Kelvin could finish Clive off, he was teleported away by General Phase, who was close by riding on a golem. Phase then introduces himself and says he's the mastermind behind the attack on the Elven village. Despite Kelvin demanding that Phase hand over Clive and his accurate deduction of the golem monster under his control, Phase rejects the demand but claims that victory was his that day. However, to Kelvin it was a tie, and has the party return to the village to recuperate. Meanwhile, at Tryson Castle, Clive is chained and cuffed onto a table and under Phase's command, tortured by his 4 charmed soldiers as an experiment for cursed weapons. Back at the Elven village, the villagers and Kelvin's party celebrates with a banquet, and Kelvin watches atop a hill not too far from the place. Soon he's joined by Ethel, who shows him a medallion that once belonged to her mother, and Kelvin attaches it to her hair. It's then that Ethel requests that she serve him for life, and he happily accepts. They're soon joined by the rest of Kelvin's party and a little elf girl who turns out to be Leonhardt Gon in disguise. Gon claims that Kelvin passed his S-rank exam, and his official promotion ceremony will be held in 4 days, featuring mock battles with other S-rank people. The news excites Kelvin, and he can't wait to face off against more strong opponents. The end. Be sure to subscribe for more amazing recaps.